than their bite, and they bark a lot. They barked for many, many years. You know, that's the second time, the 181 ballistic missiles. There were 350 projectiles, including ballistic missiles, drones, rockets, and UAVs against Israel. April 13th. They were 99% of those were shot down. Most of the ballistic missiles were shot down. When you think of Iran militarily, they really don't have a kind of air force that can get to Israel. The army is 700 miles away, and they're not going to be marching through Syria on their way to Israel. So the ballistic missiles is really the main goal. And now, other than that, is the nuclear facilities. If they can get a nuclear bomb, that's a game changer. And putting that on a ballistic missile, would put Israel, its existence, under threat.
Well, I want to talk about that in a moment. But,
sure.
President Biden says any Israeli response must be proportionate. He wants no targeting of Iranian nuclear development facilities. So how problematic is that for Israel?
Well, I think it's very problematic because Israel's looking at, their very existence on an Iranian nuclear bomb, because they've been talking for years, ever since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, that they want to destroy the Jewish state. Sure. Now, if they get a nuclear bomb, they could do that, potentially. So proportionate, why Biden would actually say you got to be proportionate. Israel has suffered 13,000 rockets in the last year from Hamas, 12,000 from Hezbollah, hundreds from Yemen, Syria, and Iran. So how proportionate would the U.S. be if they had that kind of missiles coming in just a year? And if you go back to 2005, Hamas has fired thousands more. So proportion seems to be maybe not a bit disconnected.
Well, what if they went through? What if they got through? I mean, Israel was able to shoot them down, but what if they didn't have that missile defense?
Exactly. So they had the Iron Dome, they had the David Sling, and they had the Arrow that can shoot missiles in the atmosphere, above the atmosphere. So if they didn't have that, they'd be looking at thousands of casualties, potentially damage to military installations. So Israel has to respond, and they have to try to eradicate. And I think, Gary, since October 7th, there's been a change in the mindset of Israelis. We can't live with Hamas. We need to take care of them. We can't live with Hezbollah on the northern border with well over 150,000 rockets. And now we need to do something with Iran to stop them.
Well, just last month, the IAEA reported Iran was close to reaching the 90% level of weapons-grade enriched uranium. That's enough for 4 nuclear explosive devices. And a year and a half ago, the IAEA believed Iran had already reached the 84% level.
Right.
So when Iran's foreign minister says the regime will respond more powerfully, might he be insinuating a nuclear weapon? What would be more powerful than a ballistic missile?
Right. A ballistic missile with a nuclear warhead on it would be something more powerful.
So Israel may have no choice then.
Yeah, they might. Exactly. And maybe this is just the opportunity they need after being attacked in April 13th and just a few days ago, when I was, like millions of other Israelis, in a bomb shelter. So you have to eliminate this threat. And it seems like a prime opportunity to go ahead and strike the nuclear facilities. And it would not only be a benefit to Israel, but it would be a benefit to the United States and all Western countries.
What do you see happening on Israel's northern front in Lebanon? Because Netanyahu has pledged to return people to places like Kiryat Shimon and so forth, but they have to be protected. What do you see happening? Yeah,
well, you know what it's like up there, Gary. You've served in Israel and Lebanon. I think that is one of their official war goals, to make sure that over 60,000 Israelis that had to evacuate on October 8th to get back to their homes. And then there's a few million Israelis under rocket fire. So I think the ground offensive will continue, and they may try to establish a security zone from the Lebanese-Israeli border all the way up to the Litani River.
Okay, and finally, Chris, on the Gaza war front, Hamas says their leader, Yahya Sinwar, is alive, and they say they'll kill 1 hostage every time Israel hits Gaza civilians without warnings. Don't Hamas fighters shield themselves with civilians? So how does Israel save the remaining hostages?
Yeah, well, they do that. That's part of their strategy. They use human shields to defend themselves, and also when civilians get hurt, it's part of their propaganda. Then they blame Israel. So
Vladimir Putin is making very clear where he stands now. And he has made a choice. and he has chosen the Iranian axis. And I think Israelis at this point have their eyes wide open to this. And a few years ago, I'd say 2018, 2017, I'd be in Israel. I'd be meeting with former Israeli officials, intel types, military types, political types. And they would all say, look, Russia's not a big concern. But I'd say, guys, look, Russia's at your doorstep. They're in Syria, thousands of Russian troops. They could effectively control the airspace above Syria. That could create big problems for you. They're aligned, are the Russians, with Iran, with Hezbollah, with the Assad regime. Presumably, they're sharing intelligence with these terrorist forces. And I also argued, I believe correctly, that this was the first time that we've seen a nuclear power, Russia, nuclear weapons power, openly aligned with terrorist organizations. Now, I guess the closest parallel would be the Taliban and the Pakistani intelligence services and military. But this was another level. Hezbollah, the Iranian regime, I mean, shoulder to shoulder with Russian soldiers on the battlefield. And that's a alarming thought. What was said, here's what Putin said during what's been called a landmark meeting by the Russian media between he and Pezeshkian today. And remember, Pezeshkian's only been the Iranian president for a few months. And by the way, key point here, Pezeshkian is the messenger. I don't want to call him an errand boy, but listen, at the end of the day, Iran's supreme leader, that's Ayatollah Khamenei, he makes the decisions. Pezeshkian is kind of the regime's face to the world. Iran's president, subservient to the supreme leader, plays that role. They do the international junkets. You'll see him at the UN. You'll see them meeting with world leaders, with diplomats. They transmit the supreme leader's message to the world, oftentimes with a kinder, gentler face than the supreme leader. But Pezeshkian met with Putin, and whatever Pezeshkian said was delivered directly from Ayatollah Khamenei. He is a messenger in that sense. Bible prophecy buff, your sensors are going off right now. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But just in a purely, in the natural, I guess you would say, it's not a shock to me that Iran is now cleaving closer to Russia, because we've said, look, as Iran's ring of fire unravels, and it is unraveling, Hamas has been smashed, Hezbollah's on its heels. So that entire ring of fire strategy, I should say, that Iran cultivated over decades, really, is now blowing up literally in their faces. So I've said over the past few weeks, expect Iran to say, you know what? Our proxy strategy, it was great while it lasted, but now it's kind of unraveling, and it's just not reliable enough. What we need is to solidify our relationships with nation states, in particular, nuclear-armed nation states. Hello, Russia. And that relationship was already blossoming. Maybe blossoming is not the right word to use for that relationship, but it was growing. We'll just say that. China, Iran already has this, I believe it's 25 years, it's either a 20 or 25-year agreement they signed in 2021 or 2022. Iran and China have this cooperation agreement. Iran supplies China with cheap oil and gas, and China supplies Iran with all manner of things in return. I assume one of those would be military hardware, perhaps some nuclear know-how, who knows? And then you will see, I should say, Iran and Turkey coming closer together. Now, it's interesting. In that interview I mentioned yesterday with Jonathan Chanzer, we discussed this because Turkey is kind of sees itself as the Sunni superpower, or they'd like to be. They'd like to revive that Ottoman Caliphate, the seat of which was in Istanbul. And Erdogan, the demagogue who leads Turkey now, would like to lead a revived Islamic caliphate. If you don't know what a caliphate is, funny word, I know. It's basically a union of all Islamic nations united under one leader called the Caliph. Erdogan would love to be that leader. That's on the Sunni side. On the Shia side, of course, Iran is the top dog. So on one hand, you could say, wow, Iran and Turkey are kind of vying for supremacy in the Islamic world. But on the other hand, and perhaps maybe that would happen one day, not in a military sense, but just influence sense. But I'll tell you, as you see Israel, as you see Turkey coming against Israel, Iran, their rhetoric mirrors each other. I mean, you could give me a quote. You could take a quote from Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish leader. Just give me a few quotes of him talking about Israel. Don't tell me who said it. Just give me the quotes. And you'd be hard pressed not to say, wow, that was the leader of Hamas, or that quote must be from the leader of Hezbollah or the Ayatollah in Iran. No. Or I should say, yes. They're certainly engaging in that kind of rhetoric as well, calling Israel a terrorist state, comparing Benjamin Netanyahu to Hitler, saying that Israel wants to invade Turkey. The list goes on. It's calling for a global alliance and an Islamic alliance against Israel, to come against Israel. Talk about prophetic overtones. But no, it would be revealed if you put the name to the quote that the one who said it was none other than the leader of a NATO member nation with the second largest military in the NATO alliance. We're talking, yes, about Recep Tayyip Erdogan. So look for Iran and Turkey to come together more closely with Russia as well. It's no coincidence that those three leaders are meeting on the regular, leaders of Russia, Turkey, and Iran. Three nations that have really been at each other's throats over the centuries until fairly recently. And I believe they will align. And here it is, prophetically.